here's the way that I would sum it up, Doug. If someone has cancer, probably one of the most important things that they need to talk to, the person they need to talk to, is a person who survived cancer. Just other than just to tell them what life is about. But I'll be damned if I want that person operating on me. And I think that that's where we've gone wrong, is that we're way out of in the prison consulting world, which just has a terrible name. We're way outside of our swim lane. They're all over the place.
From the very moment a defendant is involved in this system, someone else has control over their story. They want to define that person solely by the crime they may have committed. You have a sentencing date set, and the stakes are high. Both lawyer and client need to do everything in their power to prepare. But the question is, are you ready? I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year defense lawyer, a sentencing consultant, and an award-winning documentary filmmaker. In Set for Sentencing, I'm going across disciplines and outside the box to help both lawyer and client expand their perspective, build on their skills, and get real results in the form of significantly reduced sentences. All of this in service to one goal: to bring more fairness, more compassion, and more justice to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, this is Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Listen, there's been a lot of talk lately about prison consultants, these so-called fixers. And recently there was I would say, controversial article in the New York Times. And here's what it was entitled: "Want to do less time? A prison consultant might be able to help. For a price," this is the subtitle, and I'm quoting, "for a price, a new breed of fixer is teaching convicts how to reduce their sentence, get placed in a better facility, and make the most of their months behind bars." So these so-called fixers have really become a cottage industry in recent years, and it is vital to be able to distinguish between the substance and the snake oil. So helping us get set for sentencing today is a gentleman by the name of Walt Pavlo. Walt is the founder of a group called Prisonology. This is an expert network firm of retired Bureau of Prisons professionals who are there to work with defendants and criminal defense lawyers on federal prison issues. Hello, Walt Pavlo. Welcome to Set for Sentencing. How are you?
Set for Sentencing. Doug, thanks for having me. That's awesome.
All right. So before we dig right in, I do want to just tell my audience more about you, because your bio is really fundamental here as we talk about this, because I think a recurring theme as we go forward in our discussion is going to center on qualifications. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about your qualifications. But let's see here. Walt, you created a Prisonology to support attorneys and defendants. Prior to that, you were a nationally recognized speaker who lectured on white-collar crime and complex litigation. Your talks were part of training for the FBI, for the U.S. attorney's offices, for business schools, for law schools, for Big Four accounting firms. You've co-authored the book Stolen Without a Gun. Among other things, you are a very popular contributor to Forbes and the New York University Law School, where you write about white-collar crime and criminal justice. And I can go on and on.
Wow, I sound pretty good there.
Yeah,
so far, so good.
I literally could go on and on, but the point is, people get it. You're the real deal. And so where do we even start with this? So
how do you even get it? How do you even get into? How do you even have a background like that? It's probably a good leap into
perfect.
That.
Let's do it.
It's funny. So just cut to the bottom line. I too went to prison 21 years ago in the MCI WorldCom debacle. And Doug, what I always tell people is I'm usually like just a few questions away from somebody knowing that I went to prison, particularly when I'm flying around on an airplane. They go, what do you do? I'm a speaker. What do you speak on? White collar crime. And then they go, wow, how did you get into that? Well, then that's a conversation that usually happens quick. But I lucked out. I'll say that I made some huge mistakes cooking the books at MCI WorldCom, and went to prison for that. Pled guilty, and didn't know what I was going to do with my life when I got out. And the Federal Bureau of Investigations contacted me about doing training on accounting. I'm not an accountant. I'm an engineer with an MBA. So I'm just good at numbers. And I looked for other work, but I found it rewarding to talk about, one, my mistakes, and number two, to help people learn from them. And so that was my intent. And then, as one of the things that I found out in doing this kind of work was I was around really smart people, and I enjoyed learning more as I went. And an engineer and an MBA teach you a lot about business, but you don't learn about the law. And I found it fascinating. And so for 15 years, I did lecturing, papers, helped create content for documentaries. I mean, I did everything. I just dove into it and I enjoyed it. And then I said, if I'm going to do something with consulting, with prison, I'm going to do it different than anybody else. And that meant that I was going to get somebody who actually worked at a prison, who knew the policies or wrote the policies. And that's where that's what I've been doing now for about 7 years.
All right, so let's focus on that, because you started off by saying I too went to prison, and so what
right.
People who maybe haven't read the recent press about this may not know is that this cottage industry that's popping up is, by and large, maybe exclusively, I don't know, but it's people who have been to prison, who have been released from prison, and who are now holding themselves out as experts in various capacities. And so, here's my take on it, because I'm not here to cut anybody else down. I'm not here to call anyone else out necessarily, but I am here to tell the truth. And part of the reason I do this podcast is I always say this is about awareness, and it's about fairness, and it's about the humanity in the justice system. And so here's the truth. There are things as a lawyer I know, and there are things as a lawyer I don't know. And the good lawyers can distinguish between those two. And when they don't know something, they need to find an expert who does. And so I do fundamentally believe that if you have been to prison, you have a life experience that I do not have. And I am not able to tell my client with any certainty what life is going to be like for you when you're inside those prison walls. And how do I cope and manage day to day? How do I improve my life? How do I position myself in programming that might help me get early release? That's a whole universe of things that I do not understand. And I think there is value for someone who's actually been a prisoner, who has a perspective even beyond the administration or a warden or something like that. So these prison consultants may bring value to the case, but I have two issues that I'm worried about here. One is that they're working outside of the team, not with the lawyer in charge of the case, but maybe sometimes even against the lawyer, that they're brought in in an extra capacity. And the other one is this idea about what are your true qualifications and stay in your lane. Because if you go back to this New York Times article, the first thing that these prison consultants can supposedly help with is getting a lower sentence,
right?
Which is fundamentally the lawyer's job.
Correct.
Now, part of getting, I'll be honest, part of getting a lower sentence can be, Judge, I need to explain to you what prison's going to be like if you send this person to prison. And in order to understand what life is going to be like on the inside, sure, lawyer, bring in a consultant to help explain that, Judge, and that will help you get a lower sentence. But if you read this article and you look at some of the work they're doing, it goes way beyond this. It's preparing them for a pre-sentence interview. It's writing their life story. It's helping them allocute. It's sentencing. It's giving them all kinds of advice outside of the lawyer-client relationship. Is that what Prisonology is up to?
Well, Look, here's the way. I agree with everything you just said. I'm totally on board with. In fact, most of the people that I work with don't even know that I've ever gone to prison. I think it's a distraction. It's like they want to talk to experts. But here's the way that I would sum it up, Doug. If someone has cancer, probably one of the most important things that they need to talk to, the person they need to talk to, is a person who survived cancer. Just other than just to tell them what life is about. But I'll be damned if I want that person operating on me, right? I don't.
That's a great analogy.
So you just want to have, there's certain things that you can do, and I would say that most inmates can answer 80 to 90% of the questions, just like we probably know 80 to 90% of the law. But it doesn't matter. That extra 10% is everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where we've gone wrong, is that we're way out of in the prison consulting world, which just has a terrible name. We're way outside of our swim lane. They're all over the place. People are swimming around the pool.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what do you do? Oh, we do that. You do allocution? Yeah, we do that. Do you talk to my family and say, yeah, we do that? Do you, can you write pro se motions? Oh yeah, we can do that too. That is wrong. There's just no, it's just like whatever you want to do. That's what, that's the service we provide. And that's something we just don't do. What is our expertise? What is your question? Do we have the right person to answer the question? And, can we back it up? So that, right. and we've gotten away from that in the industry.
Right. It's hard to imagine how getting sentenced to a term of prison makes you an expert in reducing your sentence. But but here's the thing. Let's talk just a little bit about, so for lack of a better term, you have a stable of experts that in Prisonology, and one of them I will say is one of my favorite human beings in the world, and a good friend and a colleague, and I've used her a million times in cases, and it's Maureen Baird. And I'm going to put, there's a link in the show notes, but she was already on the podcast, episode 3, telling the story of prison at sentencing. And Maureen's a great example of a true expert with impeccable qualifications. She's worked her entire career at the Bureau of Prisons and rose from a counselor to the head to warden at some of the biggest, scariest facilities in the United States. So she knows the ins and outs of prison better than anyone I've ever known. But you have a lot of folks like that. Just give me a snapshot view. What other kinds of experts do you have at Prisonology?
Well, first of all, Maureen, all 5'2" of her, ran MCC New York, and an amazing person. And on that note, there's not a week that goes by that I don't learn something from her.
Me too.
She when you start to talk to her about experiences, and God knows in this business, there are people who have unique circumstances, and she's seen them in her 30 years of working as a consultant or, as a warden. But she's the main, she's the main deal of our work. But a good friend of mine who's become a great advisor to us is Hugh Hurwitz. Hugh is the former director of the Bureau of Prisons. He was the acting director, probably would have got the job if a certain defendant wouldn't have hung himself in MCC New York prior to facing trials on human trafficking and underage contact. But anyway, he retired from the Bureau of Prisons, and he's just a great resource for us. Unlike Maureen, who's very tactical, he's more overview policy contacts and throughout Washington. Another great example is a guy that we have is Jim Carey. Jim worked in the disciplinary hearing office as an officer. People get in trouble. What are their rights? And he's really good at a very tactical level, and really helps us. Shannon Rodriguez worked at the DSCC. She was just an incredible resource, is doing computations, complex sentence computations.
What was the organization? What do those letters stand for?
Oh, and yeah, what is it? The Designation and Sentence Computation Center, the DSCC. They do all the computations. A lot of issues come up, particularly with people who have state cases. When do they start serving their federal sentence? Concurrent, consecutive? I don't have any idea. I'm an engineer, and it confuses me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff, and I would say that 80% of our work is with federal public defenders, people who've done significant amount of time. Do we do a few white collar folks here and there? We absolutely do, but nothing against the white collar folks. But there's more material to work for to help someone who has been in prison, who has gone through tough times, versus the person who has an Ivy League, has never done anything before, and is looking at 10 months in prison. I mean, it's sort of limited what you can do. So almost going back to your first thing you were saying, Doug, the guy who's reading for the fixer is the rich guy. So, the guy who's got 10 months, I can just pretty much tell you, you pretty much got nothing coming. We're going to try the best that we can, but give me the guy who's been in for 15 years and is coming up on a resentencing on a -2, and you want to talk about how great he's done in programming in a penitentiary environment. You're a storyteller. That's a story,
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of work that we do. And Maureen is she's the field manager, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she sees everything, and she knows resources, and she's a sponge of information. And that, we work very well together as a team. So that's who we are. And we're always looking for somebody that's retired from the BOP, U.S. probation, anything to sort of give us that edge,
Right.
Who do we talk to?
And what you said about most of the work that you do is for federal public defenders is important to me, because what it says is, it's not about the money, because you get paid, but you're going to get hired, but there are limits on what a person can be paid by federal offices, and it's CJA appointments and that sort of thing. But also because, as I'm reading between the lines of some of the publicity about these so-called fixers, it sounds like the MO of some of these groups are, okay, you've got a free lawyer, so just give me the money that you would have spent hiring a private lawyer, and I'll do all the heavy lifting that your lawyer doesn't know how to do, or can't do, or won't do, or doesn't have time to do. And I don't know if that's what's happening or not, but I found myself reading the article going, well, where is the lawyer in all of this? Because the only thing the article and I realize you're a journalist, so you pick and choose the parts of the story that you include, but the main role the lawyer played in there was basically to screw up the case in this story, which was he had some esoteric legal argument about the sentencing guidelines that he was going to argue in front of the judge, and that was going to win the day, but he doesn't know what he's talking about, and all that lawyer mumbo jumbo is a waste of time. Come with us and we'll do it right. And by doing it right, and this is another thing I fundamentally agree with the philosophy of those folks, which is narrative is everything. It is deeply, deeply, deeply important to tell your client's story on a human level at sentencing. What I fundamentally disagree with is the idea that the lawyer is not in charge of that and shouldn't be in charge of that. But I also believe that maybe this whole cottage industry is my fault, is the lawyer's fault in some way, that we've created maybe a vacuum or a need for that. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think I can. And Doug, I'm going to agree with you. It is your fault. I think the things have come together that make this industry some of the problems that it is. One, never underestimate the fear of taking one's freedom. I talk to families every day, and they go, we got 15 months, and they're just like, they just can't even imagine. I mean, you would have been better off saying that you had a terminal disease. They would be able to sort of grasp that concept. But you have a fear, an extremely vulnerable person at that time. They are so afraid. They're looking for an answer. And if the attorney doesn't have the answer, who they've been exclusively talking to for possibly years before they get to this point, now they're really afraid, because now they're truly on their own. And a lot of attorneys don't know about that transitional period of, post, sentencing, what's going to happen to my client. And that's what's created this thing. You have fear, and you have the expert and the attorney who now doesn't know. And now we have the ultimate culprit, the internet. The ability to come in and just say, hey, you know what? I'm an expert, and I can probably Google half the stuff that I need to know to let you know that I'm an expert. I mean, not only do I have an experience, but I could probably give you a couple of policies, and I can pretty much show you what you can do.
Right.
And that's created this quasi expert, that are out there that are touting what they know. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I, what you had mentioned earlier, I just want to add on to this about, why I would come onto a podcast. Why do I teach CJA classes and public defender classes and write in Forbes, for which I don't necessarily get paid a lot of money to do, to put out information, is because that's my job. That's an obligation, is to teach, to share information. I don't have anything exclusive unless you want me to work the hours to work on your problem. But if I learn something, I'm sharing that with as many people as I can. And you can call it for free. I don't call it pro bono. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm in the information exchange business.
Yep.
And the more that I give out, it seems like the more that I get back in.
Yep. Yeah. I do think that fundamentally, from a lawyer's perspective, this is a lesson in lack of leadership, that the lawyers, and when you say, we don't know about prison issues, that's 100% correct, but it's deeper than that, which is many of the lawyers really don't understand the value of the human element of telling a client's story at sentencing. So again, fundamentally agree with that philosophy, that is crucial. And it's probably 90% of what I talk about on this podcast, and it's 1,000% of what I do in my work, because I'm the sentencing video guy and I'm the storyteller guy.
Right.
And that is everything, and it is more important than the esoteric guidelines arguments in a lot of ways, I believe. But I don't think lawyers fully embrace that, and I also don't think we're ever taught it in law school, and I also don't think a lot of times our personality is well suited to be the touchy-feely, tell me your story kind of person. It's get just the facts, please kind of situation.
Well, as you know, many defense attorneys were former prosecutors. So,
yes.
So they didn't necessarily learn people skills,
right,
in their first job.
And they didn't necessarily go into criminal law because they love criminal defendants. They went into it because they want. And I'm not here to bash look, right. Some of my best friends are prosecutors, but no, the truth is, there are great. Like, I had Ashley Adams on this podcast, and she was a former U.S. attorney, and she's a freaking awesome criminal defense lawyer. Why? Because she cares. And I think there are a lot of former prosecutors out there who do get it and do care, but there are also some who said, okay, my time at the prosecutor's office is done, so now I'm going to go out into private practice, but I only know criminal law, so I guess I'll just do defense, even though I have to hold my nose when I sit in a room with a criminal defendant, because I hate these people. Right. And there's no way you can ever get to learn somebody's story and connect with them and advocate for them in the way that you need to if your heart's not in it. Sorry, that's just my fundamental belief there. So, but
that's true. I will add too, Doug. One of the things, like, I don't want to bash on lawyers, because we do a lot of work, with lawyers.
Well, I'm a lawyer, so you could bash on me all you want.
I do think, though, that a statistic you would mention earlier about the New York Times article, one of the things that bothers me is, like, you don't really need a lawyer. Let them go through, whatever gobbledygook. You're going to plead guilty anyway, so you need the fixer to help you out. The thing that makes that just total bullshit is that some of the best defense attorneys get the best outcomes by putting on an excellent defense for as long as they can, and then getting to that point. Part of what you're doing in the lead up to a trial, which we know that there are too few trials, is poking holes in the prosecutor's case. And the more holes you poke into them, the better off the deal is going to be. If you just walk in and say, hey, my client's guilty, which is what the New York Times article was, dealing off of, everybody pleads guilty. And I hear that way too much. That's a false statistic. Everybody does plead guilty, but that doesn't mean that lawyers aren't working, vigorously on behalf of their clients.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't mean that their influence isn't reflected in a lower sentence that is out there, not because of an allocution or some, things like that. Those are parts of it, but it's, and it's very key that the attorneys work their asses off up until getting to that point. And then we take over. Guys like us take over as an expert then.
And add to that, the work that goes into before they get to the guilty plea is mitigation. We take a page out of death penalty lawyers, and I'll have Alan Ellis on the podcast next week's episode, and he says, tongue in cheek, but absolutely true, Alan, when does mitigation start? And he says, when the check clears, meaning we're doing that from the very beginning. And that is death penalty 101, that mitigation is at the beginning. So it's not just it is poking holes in the case and showing the deficiencies in the proof elements of a criminal charge, but it's also simultaneously learning that story, telling the narrative. I just submitted a plea letter yesterday, and it was divided into two sections. One, all the reasons why their case was garbage, and two, their life story and all the reasons why this person is worthy of, consideration and redemption. Right. And so a good lawyer knows this, and a good lawyer can do this. Now, if the other side were here, the other side, but I'm just saying, the most vociferous advocates for this fixer industry here would say they fundamentally disagree with the concept that an experienced lawyer does those things in terms of storytelling. What they would like their clients or their customers to believe is that a lawyer is fundamentally lacks credibility when they're telling a client's story, because a judge knows they're paid to be there, and that they're just, whatever the lawyer says is stuff the lawyer has to say. And so it means a lot more coming from the client. And I pretty much fundamentally agree with that too. But what I disagree with is that a lawyer is not fully responsible for preparing that client to tell their own story in a credible, genuine, meaningful way. So a lawyer is not just a mouthpiece. A lawyer is not just a potted plant. A good lawyer does those things. And what I think the criticism or the critique would be is you're just jealous because we're, successful, or, you're worried because we're competition, or you're a hater, or whatever it may be. And the answer is no. I'm genuinely concerned because I care about the clients first and foremost, and I care about my profession, right? And so one of the things I'm most concerned about, and I promise you I'm not leveling this allegation at the New York Times piece people, but that there are so-called fixers out there who are genuine fraudsters. So I would love for you to speak to me about some examples that you've had in the past of some really bad actors in this space.
Yeah, as I segue into that, it's just good comments. This is easy for me to tail off you. I'm gonna get to those, but I will say that there's in my work, and I'm certain in your work, when you work with the attorney, there is a light that goes off that you feel like now they've learned something from what you provided, and they're engaged. And I think it's frustrating for attorneys to sort of get to the end, and then these guys run off to a fixer. It's just got to be just like, geez, all that work that I did, and and now the relationship's over. And they've gone to they've got a bad boyfriend or girlfriend. That's to me what it looks like. Rather than, I've worked with attorneys just like you have, and their eyes light up like, that's a great way to tell that story. I can use that, right? And you feel like you've given them something, and it's not just, just running away. Everybody's mad at their attorney at the end if they're going to jail. Okay, that's usually what they, you have to admit, like, geez, this isn't what I expected. But there's been some really bad actors out there. I think what was it? The RDAP Law Group or some crap. There was, the Residential Drug Abuse Program Law. Okay, already. I mean, I already know that it's illegal.
Just put law in the title, and I don't think any of those folks were lawyers.
They weren't lawyers, and they probably weren't RDAP experts, because what they were teaching was fraud. And what they were teaching was that in order to get to the Residential Drug Abuse Program that gets you up to a year off in the Bureau of Prisons, is we're going to give you every fake document that you need to get into the program. For anyone listening, if you want to get in the RDAP program, it's about as easy as anything. When you do your pre-sentence report, you say that you have an alcohol or drug abuse problem that happened within 1 year of your being indicted or arrested. Okay, that's all that you need. You don't need judges, you don't need doctors, you don't need any of that. But if you have a genuine problem, there is help in the BOP and there is a reward. Yeah. But these guys took it over the edge, telling them to take drugs so that they failed pre-trial drug test.
Show up to their self-surrender to prison drunk, they said, is some of the advice that they'd give them. Because if you do that, they know you have a drinking. And this I'll put the link in the show notes, but there's a DOJ press release, because this is not old news. This is Friday, December 10th, 2021, and it was in Michigan. And the dude in charge of this got 72 months in prison for basically bilking like desperate people looking for answers out of $2.6 million for that advice about showing up drunk to prison.
Now, was that was an RDAP Law guy?
Yeah, that was RDAP Law, and
because that's been going on for a while. That that litigation or prosecution has been going on for a couple of years, three or 4 years at least, that I know.
And he'll do 72 months or whatever less time he gets once he hires a reputable firm like yours to get him some early release, and then he'll come out and be a prison consultant because he knows what president's going to be. That's what I'm worried about, right? And so again, I am not saying that these other folks are up to fraud. Okay, there's no evidence of that. That said, I was a little bit curious about what was in there about fees, because they in the article said their fees range from a few $1,000s into the six figures.
Right.
And I don't know who, why, when, how anyone would ever in a million years need to pay a prison consultant six figures. That worried me a lot.
Well, it particularly because fees should be based on expertise and the number of hours that you put in. I mean, I would like to have some magic formula where you could charge like, well, what I know is so special that it costs you $1 million. And if that included that I knew a for sure way to get out of prison earlier, then I would charge that. But that's a unicorn. That doesn't exist. You have to work hard. You have to do a lot of research. You're providing the best information, and you do the best you can. Are there ways to get out earlier and stuff? Yeah. Because I will tell you this about the Bureau of Prisons. It probably has the best policies on the planet as far as how you run a prison. They don't know a quarter of them, the people that are running the joint. So, that's where the opportunity exists, is knowing the policy to help the person out. And I look at an hour figure that's competitive for experts. I look at about how many hours it's going to take, and then that's the fee. I've had people say, well, what if I'll give you another, X number of dollars if you get me out early. I go, you know what? If you get out early, you're free to give me whatever you want. It's a fee, but I'm not, I have a base fee that you're going to give me to do my work. And if there's something that you would want to give, then that's fine. It's always amazing if when somebody gets out, then they're no longer as generous as they were when they were desperate. I would say that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't some of the value that's built into the service and the qualifications the credibility of the expert in terms of, maybe, I'm not saying there's an inside track because these are former BOPs or they have any influence that they can really peddle. That's not the point. But if they need to pick up the phone and make a call to the BOP regional office or something like that, they're probably, BOP's probably more likely to take a call from a former warden than a former inmate, don't you think?
Well, usually you would think so, but that's not the case. In fact, this is another area where we like working more with the attorney, because the attorney brings a credibility to the equation that we don't have. Hey, I'm an inmate, or I used to work at the BOP. You'd probably be better off being an inmate calling in and say that you're now with the BOP. It's better to have the attorney. It's better to keep it, provide the information to the attorney, let them submit it, and by what is written in that, which we have a significant impact on, or influence on, that we provide the content. Now you have two things. You have the content that looks like you know what you're talking about, and it's signed by an attorney who now knows what you're talking about because he or she now is informed. And then that dialogue takes place, and it's like somebody at the BOP does not want to mess with an attorney. It carries a lot of clout. They'll sue me. They're looking out for this guy. There's civil rights things that they can always, throw up that flag.
Yeah.
So those are good things, I think, that happen.
I think that's probably true too, in my experience, that my calls generally get returned eventually. But you raise there's two other sort of subplots to what we're talking about here in terms of the credibility factor or the qualification factor. So put the attorney part aside. Let's just go back to the expert from Prisonology. They can actually either submit a sworn affidavit declaration under oath, under penalty of perjury, that goes along with the attorney's submissions, and or show up to court and swear to tell the truth and testify about these issues in a court of law. Is that a distinguishing factor?
Well, it is. And that's a big part of what we do. The ability to provide a declaration. And again, the attorneys lean on these, right? It's one thing for the attorney to go into a courtroom and say, oh, you know what? The BOP they can't handle this medical issue. And versus here is their challenge, a declaration from someone like Maureen who says, you know what? These are the challenges that the BOP is currently experiencing. One of them being shortage of medical staff in competing for quality medical people. That's from Maureen, former USP warden, former MCC warden, former FCI Danbury warden. I mean, it carries a lot of weight, and it cuts to the chase because it's no longer it's just like Maureen just said it, and it's a fact. It's based on her expertise. It's based on policy. And then you can move on. So it's efficient. The lawyer doesn't have to do all this research, right? Maureen said it's true. That's what Maureen's, it's a big deal for her to do that. She takes that seriously. But if she says it, now the lawyer is down to like, wow, all I have to do is read this declaration, understand that. I don't have to look at all these policies. I have her on the team. And if I don't know, bring her in the courtroom. Maureen, explain more about the healthcare policies that are at the BOP. So in the end, our services should save the client's money because the attorney's spending less time looking around for stuff that's not in their expertise. And we're not sitting around trying to do criminal law. This is what we do. And it's a great teamwork on how we work together on that.
And in terms of the leadership, there's a real fundamental issue regarding privilege, because a lawyer must be the captain of the ship, and a good lawyer knows how to assemble a team to do the work and do the things they don't know how to do. But when a lawyer brings an expert on board, there's a privilege that attaches. There's an attorney-client privilege that can exist between the expert and the client when those communications are happening, because they're acting on behalf of the lawyer. And then there's ethical rules that guide lawyers in terms of what they can and cannot disclose about what a client says. There's privacy issues that you're entrusting experts with very personal information. And if you're working outside of the circle and ostensibly not for the lawyer and not on the team, my concern is all those issues of privilege are shattered.
Yeah.
Is that something I should worry about?
Well, it is. I mean, first of all, if I'm not working with the attorney and somebody's sending me emails, if I or another consultant, if you're sending consultants emails, those aren't protected. Okay. So if you're writing stuff in there that like, hey, I'm looking to shorten my sentence, or, okay, can you help me hide money or something like that? That's the kind of stuff that gets you in real trouble. And that's what we just stay away from that stuff, stay as far away as you can, work with the team. And there's been attorneys that have put us back in line too. Like, hey, don't write that in an email. Okay. Just like we might say, hey, this guy's disciplinary has really been an issue for us. The guy's not been too good. We need to have a call. The attorneys will say, hey, don't write stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. Call me. Just tell me you got an issue and you want to call me, and then I can, then we can call. And it's learning little nuances like that takes your level up just a little bit more. You won't see us writing emails, about stuff, evidence and things like that. Stick to policy, stick to what know when to pick up the phone and say what you have to say.
And I think about the work that I do. Most of the work, as I do these sentencing mitigation videos. So I am a sentencing consultant first and foremost. I mean, I do represent clients at sentencing, but most of what I'm doing is sentencing advocacy consulting for lawyers. And one of the ways that I sort of distinguish myself as a lawyer when a lawyer hires me is not only am I going to be able to get access into the prison because I'm a lawyer, that maybe a lay person wouldn't without a lawyer with them or helping them. But B, I've handled, I would say no joke, over 1,000 sentencings in my 25 years of lawyering. And so not only do I know for sure what's going to move the needle in court and what's not, but I know all the different ways I could step in shit along the way. Mm-hmm. And in my work, because the sentencing mitigation stuff is in the grand life of the law, and American law is in its infancy. I mean, it's been around I've been doing it almost 20 years, but right. And so now, just like the prison fixtures, there's becoming a cottage industry of video production, mitigation video production specialists, which I love in a way because it validates my life's work, that this is a thing that's been growing and growing and people are getting into this space. But what I worry about is that people with no real qualifications in the legal realm, who may be awesome filmmakers, say, I can do that, and they jump in and they don't know what they don't know. Now, I'm not bashing those people because they can do incredible work, but the only way that they can do incredible work and make sure that they're doing it right and protected is if the lawyer leads, period. They have to be intimately involved to help this person who has a very, very narrow perspective on the truth of how the legal system works, do their job correctly. And so, this is so directly analogous to these other fixers, because they may have a valuable function, they may have a valuable role to play, but if they're not led by the lawyer, it is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. The other thing, the odds out there are 50-50 that they might be right. That's caused this thing to keep going. I mean, every once in a while, the blind squirrel finds a nut, right? I mean, it's sort of like sometimes you're right, and that's when you get outcomes that seem like if you predict if I predict the sun's going to come up sometimes and predict it won't come up other times, I'm 50% right, but there's only really one, there should be, you should increase your odds. And, I've always thought about, on my particular side is that we're in the management of expectations business. We're trying to pragmatically provide information so that people understand. And we find out if they understand, they're just as comfortable, even if they don't get the outcome that they wanted, as long as they know, right? Nobody wants to, just like when they use a service like yours, it's like, did I present the best case that I could? And, when they look at the product, they look at the product that you did or the advice that you give them, and they get a sentence of X number of years, at least they can say when they show up to prison, I did everything that I could. And that's part of peace of mind that somebody should be looking for. Don't get me off. That's just silly. That's just not realistic. And the expectation is such that it can never live up to, what they're trying to do. So why not manage expectations better?
Yeah.
Provide them something they leave at the end of the day and said, you know what? I had a good defense. They put together a great sentencing video, and I got some great advice, and I got involved in this thing, and this is where I am. I think that's the best that we can do.
Right. And I think that's also a failure of leadership for the lawyer, because one of the things we can be notoriously bad about is communicating. So, you mentioned this. Well, what happens is lawyers given this all and then they run off to a fixer? Well, the reason they're running off to a fixer is because they're scared. They're worried that their lawyer's not doing the job. And a lot of times the lawyer is 100% doing the job. They're just not communicating all of the things that they've been up to, or they're so busy they couldn't take the client's calls. And so the client assumes they're on the pay me no mind list, when that's not necessarily the truth. And this is just my advice to my colleagues out there, as long as you are consistently demonstrating that you are there, you know what you're doing, and most importantly, you care, you're never going to have them run off to a fixer, because what you say will be, the advice that they know is right and true, and they're not going to have that fear factor. I remember one case that I had, it was an immigration case where these fast track pleas, the sentences are predetermined. So I could be Clarence Darrow, risen from the grave, and I'm not going to be able to get him a sentence below whatever the stipulated fast track plea offer was. But it still pissed me off, and I still made an impassioned plea at sentencing for this client. And most of the time we're just saying, well, there's nothing I can say, so let's go. But I was, for whatever reason, I had to be in my bonnet about something that was happening in the case, and I wanted to make it known. And I stood up and I spoke the truth, and I told my client's story, and he got the sentence we all knew he was going to get. And it was too much time, because that's how our system works. And you know what that client did? He looked at me right before they shuffled him off to jail, and he's in shackles at the podium. And he held out his hand and he shook it and he said, "Thank you so much."
Right. That's exactly what that's exactly a great way to make the point that I was making, is that people just want to know that you'll get in the fight with them. And they can appreciate that you did it, and they know that it's a long shot. Look, if you're indicted, this is serious business. This is, it's going to change your life, and you need people in your corner. And if you do a good job, then that's all. You just got to look at it one client at a time. What did I learn? How do I apply it to somebody else? Those are the key things that I think that we have to do. We have to work. You have to work hard. You got to put in the work. There is no fix. Look, I work with the former director of the Bureau of Prisons. Okay. If I would go to him and say, "Hey, Hugh, can you make a call to one of your buddies to tell him to give this guy early release for CARES Act?" I mean, don't you think that happen? It just wouldn't. I wouldn't even ask Hugh that. It's just the same with Maureen. Hey, there's a warden there. You told me one time that you knew her. Can you give her a call and see what's going on? Not in a million years would we ever do that, right? I mean, it just is beyond anything that we would do. So what you do is you work it. Now, does Hugh know somebody that the lawyer should contact, right? That's what you're trying to do, navigate this labyrinth of the BOP. I need to get this answer for this thing. Who should I call? Regional counselor. Her name's Carol. Carol's great person. You need to hit her up. These are the 3 points that you need to hit her up with. Here's her phone number. Here's her email.
Yeah.
That is powerful, and the attorney's involved.
I do that all the time with Maureen, especially. I mean, there was one facility in particular that I was just trying to set a legal call. He was at BOP, and nobody was even answering the phone at this prison. Like literally, I was calling 6 times a day and nobody was even picking up. It was during COVID. And I said, Mo, what do I do? She's like, oh, this is exactly, you call it regional, or send this person an email, let them know. And I'm telling you, 20 minutes later, I had what I needed. So, all right, I think we're getting close to the end, and I'm always going to give you the last word, but I do have one last topic that I think is important. And it is, so obviously, like, Prisonology is, you're my guy, you're my people. Like these are the people that I would go to do the work that I need done in a case. But this is not a podcast about selling, or starting fights or anything else. So I would say, if you're listening to this and you think you need help, and you're going to go out there, you're going to find the right person. Just generally, if it's not going to be you, what are we looking for? Like what advice can you give to make sure that a scared, desperate client or their family members who want nothing more than to help them get the right people and the right advice?
Well, my first way that I try to as a business, we're reaching out to attorneys. We're not calling like consultants can do. Hey, I saw you were arrested, on your LinkedIn message, or something like that. I can help you. That's a real life thing that happens.
So if these so-called fixers are reaching out to you, the client, the defendant, soliciting you for their services, that's a red flag.
I wouldn't return a call. I mean, I wouldn't. If you get a mailer, it's embarrassing. I've seen what people tell me. They get things in the mail. They were arrested.
Yeah,
they find out their address. They send them something. Their kids pick up the mail and says, "Hey, you need a prison consultant." He's like, "Wow, what's that, Dad?" So that's a red flag. You should have somebody who what are your relationships with attorneys, and do you work with my attorney? What are your credentials? What does your resume look like? What do you guys do? Just give me a CV. Who do you work with? What are your services? And what can I expect in a statement of work? That's related to what it is that you're supposed to perform, and are the fees in line with that experience and that work scope? I have experience. These are the number of hours that I'm going to spend. It's going to cost X number of hours. If it's something where I would, where you would quote $100,000, I would try to add up like how many hours is that? I mean, I try to give someone an expectation of what the hours, and the main thing I think is will you work with my attorney? I mean, do you have the ability to work with my attorney and work with the attorney so that you could testify? Can you testify? Can you provide a court declaration? Can you provide something certified? And and how are you going to work with my attorney? And we should be able to, just like in your work, you should be able to work with an attorney and save them money overall. I don't want to take dollars from an attorney, but if you're working about efficiency and what you do in storytelling or what we do in providing expert advice, there should be some money savings at the very end of the day, because everybody's in their lane doing what they're supposed to, and the lawyers can do the lawyering thing and we can do our thing. So they have to be able to testify. They have to be able to step up and say, look, this is the way things work. This is my opinion. And you may not agree with my opinion, but this is my opinion and it's based on my work. That's what you really should be looking for when you're looking for a consultant. There are others out there besides us, but don't go to someone who's going to promise you something and think that the more money you pay that you're getting some platinum package. There really is, you got to put in the work. You have to work.
Yeah, that would be my first question. If someone came to me and said, should I hire these guys? I would say, well, what did they promise you? What did they guarantee? And if the answer is nothing, well, that's a good sign.
Right.
If the answer is, I guarantee you'll get X amount of time off your sentence or whatever, there are no guarantees. And lawyers do that shit all the time too. I get people to say, well, I was talking with so-and-so and they said they could get me probation. And I'm like, no. Maybe you can get probation at the end of the day, but if they told you that's what's going to happen, they are lying to you.
Right.
They're lying to you to get your money.
Yeah.
And that's
you've got to work. You have to, what you can promise them is that you'll work hard for them. I'll work
Yeah.
hard for you, and I'll do the things that are on this list. And then at the end of the day, there's plenty of people that have gone to prison for way too long. And we were talking about it before we went on air, some great attorneys who got guys out of, men and women out of prison, but they were in prison for 20 years, so it's hard work. You have to do the work to help a person out. And you've got to find somebody that can just talk just like we have in this, pragmatically. Mm-hmm. What am I looking at? Here's what we do. Let me look at that. Let me talk to this person. Let me get Maureen on the phone.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you have to be able to do.
Well, that is awesome. And I feel like maybe we've reached the thrilling conclusion of our time together. But I do want to give you, I think I still have the last word in terms of, I just want to reiterate a few things. One is, I am not impugning the reputation or insinuating that any of these folks are up to fraud or no good in any way, shape, or form. I'm simply wanting the people to be educated about the full picture. Two, I really do fundamentally believe at the end of the day, this is our fault as lawyers. And so that is the thing that I would leave my brothers and sisters in the law with is, if you're doing it right, you're not going to have this problem. You're not going to have these outside influences insinuating themselves into your case and making life difficult for you. And if you communicate with the client and you show that you care and you promise to work hard and they know that you're doing the best for them, you're going to be fine. And you're going to find the right people to do the right job in your case. So it's all on us. Ultimately, we're responsible. At the end of the day, for whatever happens, it's on us. So why wouldn't we step up and lead in the right way? What else did I forget? Is there anything else you want listeners to know? I'm definitely going to put links in the show notes to Prisonology and all that good stuff. But you get the last word.
All right. Well, thank you.
Forbes, some of your great Forbes articles.
Go to. I always give two things. I said, go to Prisonology.com. You're just going to see how to contact us. So that's nothing. Forbes is my platform. Why would it be Forbes? I mean, it's the craziest thing. Why am I on Forbes writing about prison, right? And it's a very easy thing. The guy who co-authored my book is Neil Weinberg, who wrote Stolen Without a Gun with me, about my own prison experience and working at MCI WorldCom. It's mostly on the business side, very little on the prison thing, but what led up to it. Neil was a senior editor at Forbes, and they were coming up with this thing called blogging. And he says, hey, we're looking for interesting people. And I told my boss, you would be good. So I started writing, 12 years ago for Forbes, and they liked it. And I have a certain person that, that's looking for this stuff. And I've just been lucky. And I will, here's my inside baseball of what makes us a little bit different. Didn't work at the BOP. Okay. I was a tenant for a few years, but I will tell you this: when Forbes and my reputation calls the BOP Office of Internal Public Affairs, they take my call. They answer my question. I can get a question answered through public affairs faster than I can a FOIA request. So, I use the leverage of media that I have as my expertise to provide information to a lot of our experts who are getting information when it comes to policy. So there's my little inside baseball of what makes us a little bit different. I didn't work at the BOP, but I probably have as good or better connections than the people who currently work with us here at Prisonology.
Well, and the idea that you're very forthcoming that you live there for a little bit. And what that does is underscore that's not my issue. That folks who are former inmates are now coming out and doing some kind of work in this arena. Everybody's got a redemption story, and everybody is worthy of a second chance. And so it's like you said earlier, it's almost incidental that is a thing. It's just tell me what happens. What are your qualifications above and beyond that? Because that's not what made you qualified to do your job. And by the way, active listening pretty important. I would have circled back on something you said early on in this podcast and drilled down on it, which was once you got out, the FBI comes knocking on your door for help.
Yeah, right.
And so that in and of itself tells us something about the quality, your credibility or your qualification in some way, shape, or form, because the FBI, that's not a real common story that the FBI is going to then enlist a former inmate to work for them. I'd love to hear more about that story, but I don't know. I guess we got to go. People have busy lives.
I will tell you that one day. It's interesting too. But yeah.
Well, and then I have to read your book. That's the one thing about this podcast that I love, and also not so much because I'm not a great reader, but when I have somebody on who's written a book, like I really want to read the whole thing. So
let's do that. We can do that one time.
We'll do that one time too.
Do the book thing. So
okay, good. And of course we'll be talking, in our daily lives and cases that we handle. But Walt Pavlo, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on Set for Sentencing, and thank you for what you do. And I will talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you for what you do too, Doug. I appreciate it.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you like the podcast, please do me a favor. Spread the word about Set for Sentencing and give us a rating and review on the iTunes podcast platform. It would really help. Last but not least, if you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.